When you live in the future, you become anxious. When you live in the past, you become depressed. But living in the now, that's a recipe for happiness. That's been rattling around in my brain over and over again all week long. And it's simple, right? It's an easy thing to latch on to. It's an easy thing to wrap your mind around. But the application, well, it's a little bit harder. And sometimes it feels like we're in this land of in-between, right? Like that we're stuck. Like we're perpetually trapped in between the past and the future. Like we have one foot planted firmly in the past, and we're reaching with that other foot to finally get to the present. And it's got us straddling the right now. And there's no extra feet. No more feet to ground ourselves in the present. And so we feel stuck. Do you know how many of the top 10 mental health diagnoses are associated with anxiety and depression? Guess a number. 8? 10? You got one? 4? Anybody else? 10 out of 10. 10 out of 10. Anxiety disorders, depressive disorders, addiction, PTSD, all of which associated with anxiety and depression. And it makes sense, right? It absolutely makes sense. When we're straddling the present, it's hard to be grounded in right now. And when we're lost in the past, it's impossible to be present in the moment. But my friends, the present is where we find our joy. It has always been, and it shall always be. And as we vow to become these darkness dwellers in this Lenten season, it can be even more difficult to find peace. Because of all the darkness that our spirits are surrounded with, in that place we're undergoing the fight of our lives, like nothing we've ever imagined. There's this push and pull constantly between the trauma of our past and the fear of our future. And in response to that internal battle, we're inclined to just run away, to just shut down and start moving to sprint as far as possible away from the present. But in that fleeing, we get consumed by the anxiety of the future, or we find ourselves tripped up by the depression of the past. But if we could only step outside of ourselves, if we could only see the bigger picture, if we could only recognize that sitting right between the past and the present, right between the past and the future, is the glory of God. If we could only recognize the power of right now. As we gather on this Monday, Thursday, we do so to celebrate and to rejoice in Jesus, to acknowledge the last stage of his journey. And we all know this story, but I don't really think that we understand the significance of it. That Jesus in this moment, in this time, is cloaked in humility, but also in glory. And as we sit here, we do so with an understanding that Jesus was shrouded in darkness during this time. Shrouded in absolute darkness. That the walls were closing in and the end was fast approaching. And I think we understand that a little bit more than we let on. I think down in our spirits we truly do understand that feeling of being suffocated by both the past and the future. Both of them pressing on us, looking for their pound of flesh. And Jesus is no stranger to this. That ticking clock of the Spirit. And yet, in the face of this adversity, in the face of this fear, he chose to relish the time that he had left. So I want you to think for a moment. If you had a day to live, just one day, what would you do with the time that you had left? Some of you have already decided what you would do. You already knew before I asked the question. But if you really think about how you would spend the time, well, most of us would fill it, right? We'd fill it to the brim with as much as possible, right? That's why we have bucket lists, right? I want to accomplish all of these things. And if I know when I'm going to leave this earth, well, I better get busy, right? And it makes sense, right? It makes sense that we'd want to fill it to the brim. And you'd be sure to spend a little bit of time with those that you love, right? You'd schedule that in somewhere between rock climbing and jumping out of a plane, right? But you try to maximize the time that you have left. The truth is, there's not a lot of people that throw away a half-empty drink, right? It's kind of just a waste, right? You want to finish it all, right? Maybe put it in the fridge and come back to it later, right? But that's not the response that Jesus has to this ticking clock. Jesus doesn't flee when those walls start closing in. He doesn't cower, but he also doesn't start to check off his list. Imagine the things that Jesus wanted to accomplish with his life. All of that power, all of that glory, all of the difference that he wanted to make, all of the change that he wanted to be a part of. But he didn't go to that place of checking off the list. Instead of filling his cup, he decided to empty it. And in doing so, he proves the power of right now. The anointing is from Mark chapter 14. Now the Passover and the festival of the unleavened bread were only 2 days away. And the chief priests and the teachers of the law were scheming to arrest Jesus secretly and kill him. But not during the festival, they said, or the people may riot. While he was in Bethany, reclining at the table in the home of Simon the leper, a woman came with an alabaster jar of very expensive perfume, made of pure nard. And she broke the jar and poured the perfume on his head. And some of those that were present were saying indignantly to one another, "Why this waste of perfume? It could have been sold for more than a year's wages and the money given to the poor." And they rebuked her. They chastised her harshly. "Leave her alone," said Jesus. "Why are you bothering her? She has done a beautiful thing to me. The poor you will always have with you, and you can help them anytime you want, but you will not always have me. She did what she could. She poured perfume on my body beforehand to prepare for my burial. Truly, I tell you, wherever the gospel is preached throughout the world, what she has done will also be told in memory of her." Well, Jesus was right. We're telling it now, right? You know, I've read this passage over and over and over again, year after year. And the thing that always stands out to me, without fail, is how Jesus is described. It says, while he was in Bethany reclining at the table. Reclining at the table. I can only imagine what that looked like. But does that sound like a man that's trapped between depression and anxiety? Does that sound like a man who knew that the chief priests and the teachers were secretly scheming to kill him? This is how Jesus chooses to spend some of his last moments. Not in a hurry, but absolutely cloaked in glory. The washing from John chapter 13. Just before the Passover feast, Jesus knew that the time had come to leave this world to go to the Father. And having loved his dear companions, he continued to love them right to the end. It was supper time. The devil by now had Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, firmly in his grip, all set for the betrayal. And Jesus knew that the Father had put him in complete charge of everything, that he came from God and was on his way back to God. And so he got up from the supper table, and he set aside his robe, and he put on an apron. And then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the feet of the disciples, drying them with his apron. And when he got to Simon Peter, Peter said, "Master, you wash my feet?" And Jesus answered, "You don't understand now what I'm doing, but it will be clear enough to you later." And Peter persisted, "You're not going to wash my feet." not ever. And Jesus said, if I don't wash you, you can't be a part of what I'm doing. Master, said Peter, not only my feet then, wash my hands, wash my head. And Jesus said, if you've had a bath in the morning, you only need your feet washed now, and you're clean from head to toe. My concern, you understand, is holiness, not hygiene. So now you're clean, but not every one of you. He knew who was betraying him. That's why he said, not every one of you. And after he had finished washing their feet, he took off his robe and he put it back on. And he went back to the place at the table. And then he said, do you understand what I've done for you? You address me as teacher and as master, and rightfully so. That is what I am. So if I, the master and teacher, wash your feet, you must now wash each other's feet. I have laid down a pattern for you. What I have done, you shall do. I'm only pointing out the obvious. A servant is not ranked above his master. An employee doesn't give orders to the employer. And if you understand what I'm telling you, act like it and live a blessed life. In the last moments of this life, we aren't wired to think about serving. We aren't wired to think about the model that we leave behind. Instead, we're tormented by our regrets, our fears, and our doubts about what's next. But Jesus lives a completely different example. One that's firmly grounded in the present, not looking into what was behind or what's ahead, but celebrating what's right in front of him. The people that he loved the most. The sharing from Luke chapter 22. Then came the day of the unleavened bread, on which the Passover lamb had to be sacrificed. And so Jesus sent Peter and John, saying, go and prepare the Passover meal for us, so that we may eat it. And they asked him, where do you want us to make the preparations for it? Listen, he said to them, when you have entered the city, a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. Follow him into the house he enters, and say to the owner of the house, the teacher asked you, where is the guest room? Where may I eat the Passover with my disciples? And he will show you a large room upstairs, already furnished. Make preparations for us there. And so they went, and they found everything as he had told them, and they prepared the Passover meal. And when the hour came, he took his place at the table, and the apostles with him, and he said to them, I have eagerly desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. For I tell you, I will not eat it until it is fulfilled in the kingdom of God. And then he took a cup, and after giving thanks, he said, take this and divide it amongst yourselves. For I tell you that from now on, I will not drink of the fruit of the vine until the kingdom of God comes. And then he took a loaf of bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it, and he gave it to them, and he said, this is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me. And he did the same with the cup after supper, saying, this cup that is poured out for you is the new covenant in my blood. But see, the one who betrays me is with me, and his hand is on the table. For the Son of Man is going as it has been determined. But woe to the one which whom he has betrayed. Then they begin to ask one another, which one of them could it be that would do this? You know, there's nothing more special than breaking bread with those that we love. There's nothing more enriching to our spirits, to our hearts, than sharing together. And on that last night, this most holy night, that's what Jesus desired. Maybe more than anything in the world, was to gather and to celebrate and to share with those that he loved. Can you imagine being a fly on the wall of that room? To see him truly soak up that moment. To be awash in the totality of emotions, the full spectrum. The sadness, the grief, the doubt, the fear, the absolute joy. All of those memories flooding in. to be in the past, in the future, yet firmly planted in the present. And to see those disciples that in their heart of hearts knew what was to come, even before their brains caught up to their spirits. To celebrate one last time and be reminded that love only exists in the present. The garden, from Matthew chapter 26. Then Jesus went with them to a place called Gethsemane. And he said to his disciples, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." And he took with him Peter and the two sons of Zebedee and began to be grieved and agitated. And then he said to them, "My soul is deeply grieved, even to death. Remain here and stay awake with me." And going a little farther, he threw himself on the ground and prayed, "My Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Yet not what I want, but what you want." And then he came to the disciples and found them sleeping. And he said to Peter, "So could you not stay awake with me for 1 hour? Stay awake and pray that you may not come into a time of trial. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak." Again, he went away for a second time and prayed, "My Father, if this cannot pass unless I drink it, your will be done." Again, he came and found them sleeping, for their eyes were heavy. So leaving them again, he went away and prayed for a third time, saying the same words. And then he came to the disciples, saying to them, "Are you still sleeping and taking your rest? Now is the hour. The Son of Man is betrayed into the arms of sinners. Get up and let us get going. Look, my betrayer is at hand." You know, if we ever need an acknowledgement that Jesus understands our struggles in this world, this is the place to find it. A moment of pure humanity trapped between depression and anxiety. "My Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Yet not what I want, but what you want." You know, sometimes it feels like we've been running from the darkness so long that we don't even know what we want anymore. Do we want to escape the pain, or do we want to escape the healing that lies on the other side? Do we even know what we're running from? And yet, even though the flesh is weak, the spirit is willing. You know, the second prayer is where the power truly lies. "My Father, if this cannot pass unless I drink it, your will be done." My friends, we are dying. Each and every one of us, slowly for some, but undoubtedly faster than any of us ever planned on. Faster than any of us could ever budget for. And even though it might seem like our time on earth isn't short, that we have enough time to do all the things that we dreamed, that most likely won't be the case. In the blink of an eye, those walls can come closing in, and we can be left with a decision to surrender to death or to surrender to life. And we can choose to be drowned in our depression and anxiety, to straddle both the past and the present, even though neither makes us happy. We can choose to run from the moment until we run out of moments. But my friends, where's the life in that? Where's the love in that? Where's God? Jesus faced the same crossroads that we all do. And yet he flipped it all on its head. Instead of fighting, he chose surrender. Instead of filling his cup, he chose to empty it. And instead of fear, he chose love. John highlights it in his gospel. Before the Passover feast, Jesus knew that the time had come to leave this world, to go to the Father. Having loved his dear companions, he continued to love them right to the end. Powerful beyond measure. He continued to love them right to the end. My friends, I don't know what grip that the past has on you, but I can imagine the way that it's tugging on your spirit. And I can't even understand what the future might hold for you. But I can imagine the way that it's pulling you. And I know it's hard to feel stuck between depression and anxiety, but it's a place we all find ourselves in. I know it's hard to feel like the world is closing in on you, like you can barely breathe, let alone pray. But I need you to hear this. When Jesus' soul was grieved, even to the point of death, he prayed. He didn't run. He didn't hide. He didn't quit. He prayed. Not once, not twice, but 3 times. And somewhere in the midst of all of that surrender, somewhere in the midst of all of that commitment, somewhere in the midst of letting it go, he changed. Somewhere in the middle of embracing the moment, embracing the power of right here, right now, of surrendering to the will of God, he changed. And if that can be done for him, then there's hope for us all. So what are you waiting for? From Psalm 139, where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go up to the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there. If I rise on the wings of the dawn, if I settle on the far side of the sea, even there, your hand will guide me. Your right hand will hold me fast. If I say, surely the darkness will hide me, and the light become night around me, even the darkness will not be dark to you. The night will shine like the day, for darkness is as light to you.
These are your thoughts, Tatum. This is the hope of God set free. These are your talks, it's